For decades, the Strait of Hormuz has remained one of the most strategically sensitive waterways in the world, carrying a large share of globally traded oil every day. Because so much energy supply moves through this narrow corridor, even small security incidents in the region can quickly attract international attention. Over the past several days, tensions across the Middle East have increased following reports of direct military exchanges between Israel and Iran. What had long been a shadow confrontation conducted through proxies and covert operations now appears to be moving into a more open phase. Officials in several countries confirmed that missile launches, air defense activity, and emergency alerts were recorded during a single night of heavy tension. The escalation followed earlier strikes on Iranian-linked positions in Syria, which Tehran described as a serious provocation requiring a response. In the past, similar incidents were often answered indirectly, but this time the reaction appeared larger and more visible than usual. According to regional monitoring networks, multiple projectiles were launched toward Israeli territory during what analysts described as a coordinated attack. Air raid sirens were activated in several Israeli cities as defensive systems detected incoming threats and began interception procedures. Residents reported seeing streaks of light across the sky as interceptor missiles were launched to meet the incoming projectiles. Israel's layered air defense network, built over many years, is designed to detect, track, and destroy rockets before they reach populated areas. The most well-known part of this system is Iron Dome, which has previously intercepted thousands of short-range rockets during earlier conflicts. Using radar tracking and prediction software, the system determines whether a projectile poses a threat before launching an interceptor. During past confrontations, this technology proved highly effective, preventing many attacks from causing serious damage inside Israeli territory. However, the latest barrage appeared different in scale, with reports suggesting that many missiles were launched in a short period. Analysts say such tactics are sometimes used to test defensive limits by forcing systems to respond to several threats at the same time. Videos shared online showed multiple interceptions taking place over different cities, lighting the sky as explosions marked successful defenses. Despite those interceptions, local authorities confirmed that some impacts were recorded, although details about the locations were limited. Emergency services were deployed in several areas as debris from intercepted projectiles fell to the ground. Officials did not immediately release full damage reports, but confirmed that investigations were underway to determine how many missiles got through. For many observers, the most significant change was not the damage itself, but the fact that the exchange appeared to involve direct action. For years, the confrontation between Israel and Iran had been carried out through regional allies, intelligence activity, and limited strikes abroad. Direct attacks between the two states were rare, partly because both sides understood the risk of a wider conflict. The latest events raised concern that this informal boundary might be weakening under the pressure of repeated incidents. Security analysts noted that once direct exchanges begin, controlling escalation becomes more difficult for all sides involved. Governments in the region responded by increasing alert levels around military bases, airports, and critical infrastructure. Energy facilities, communication centers, and transportation hubs were placed under additional security as a precaution. International observers began watching closely, aware that instability in this region often affects global markets and political relations. Early reactions from foreign ministries called for restraint, while intelligence agencies worked to confirm what had taken place. As more information slowly emerged, it became clear that the incident might represent the most open phase of the Israel-Iran confrontation in years. As additional details became available, defense analysts began examining how the latest exchange differed from previous incidents between Israel and Iran. Early reports suggested that the attack involved a larger number of projectiles than typically seen in earlier confrontations across the region. Launches appeared to occur in several waves, a method often used to complicate interception by forcing defensive systems to track many targets at once. Military specialists describe this approach as saturation, where the goal is not accuracy alone but the creation of more threats than defenses can handle. Even advanced air defense networks rely on limited numbers of interceptors, meaning that timing and volume can influence the outcome of an attack. Israel operates one of the most complex defensive systems in the world, combining radar, interceptor missiles, and command networks. Iron Dome handles short-range rockets, while other systems are designed to respond to longer-range missiles and higher-altitude threats. During the night of the barrage, multiple layers of defense were reportedly activated as tracking systems detected incoming objects from different directions. Residents in several cities described hearing repeated explosions overhead as interception attempts continued for an extended period. Footage recorded by civilians showed bright flashes in the sky, consistent with interceptor missiles destroying incoming rockets at high altitude. However, some videos also showed impacts on the ground, leading to questions about whether a small number of projectiles avoided interception. Officials did not immediately confirm how many missiles reached their targets, but acknowledged that debris and blast damage were under review. In large-scale attacks, even a small percentage of successful impacts can create concern, especially if critical locations are involved. Analysts began studying the pattern of launches to determine whether the strikes were aimed randomly or directed toward specific facilities. In earlier conflicts involving non-state groups, rockets were often fired without precise targeting, mainly to create pressure rather than damage. This time, some observers suggested that the incoming projectiles appeared to follow more controlled trajectories. If confirmed, that would indicate a shift toward more deliberate targeting rather than the type of mass rocket fire seen in past regional fighting. Precision strikes require more planning, better intelligence, and more advanced guidance systems than unguided rockets. Because of that, the nature of the attack quickly became a subject of debate among military experts and security officials. Some believe the goal may have been to send a political signal, while others argued the targets might have been chosen for strategic value. Israeli authorities increased security around military bases and intelligence facilities while investigations continued. Access to certain areas was temporarily restricted as teams checked for damage to communications equipment and support systems. In modern conflicts, disruption of information networks can be as important as physical damage to weapons or buildings. Intelligence centers, radar stations, and command facilities are often considered high-value targets because they support decision-making. For that reason, even limited damage to such locations could affect operations far beyond the immediate strike zone. Officials avoided discussing specific sites, but confirmed that sensitive installations were being inspected as a precaution. Meanwhile, regional governments watched closely, aware that any confirmed hit on strategic infrastructure could change the political response. Diplomatic channels became active as several countries urged both sides to avoid further escalation while facts were still unclear. Markets also reacted to the uncertainty, with energy prices showing early movement as traders considered the risk of wider instability. By the end of the first day, it was evident that the incident had raised new questions about how far the confrontation might go. As investigators reviewed the pattern of impacts, attention turned to whether the attack may have been aimed at specific military or intelligence locations. In modern conflicts, targeting decisions often reveal more about strategic intent than the amount of physical damage caused. Some early discussions among security analysts mentioned the possibility that sensitive communications or surveillance facilities had been included. Among the locations referenced in open-source speculation was infrastructure associated with Israel's military intelligence community. One organization frequently mentioned in such discussions is Unit 8200, a division widely known for its role in signals intelligence and cyber operations. The unit operates within the Israel Defense Forces and is responsible for monitoring communications, electronic signals, and digital networks. Its work supports both defensive and offensive operations, providing information used for planning, early warning, and real-time coordination. Facilities connected to this type of activity are considered strategically important because they help maintain awareness during fast-moving situations. For that reason, intelligence centers are often treated as high-value targets even if they are located far from the front lines. Disrupting communications or surveillance systems can affect decision-making without requiring large-scale physical destruction. Analysts cautioned that there was no confirmed evidence that such facilities had been hit, but the possibility was enough to raise concern. In conflicts involving advanced militaries, attacks may be designed to test defenses or send signals rather than destroy entire installations. A strike near an intelligence site, even if limited, could be intended to show that the location can be reached. That kind of message can carry strategic weight because it challenges the sense of security around critical infrastructure. Modern military planning often focuses on networks rather than individual weapons, meaning that information systems become key targets. Radar stations, data centers, and communications hubs form the backbone of command structures used to coordinate operations. If those systems are interrupted even briefly, response times can slow and uncertainty can increase. Because of this, many countries invest heavily in protecting intelligence and cyber facilities with additional security layers. Reports that such locations might have been targeted therefore drew attention not only from military officials but also from foreign governments. Diplomatic observers noted that attacks on intelligence infrastructure can be interpreted differently from strikes on empty ground. While symbolic attacks may be ignored, strikes near sensitive systems can trigger stronger reactions. This raised the possibility that the latest exchange could influence how both sides calculate their next moves. Officials in Israel avoided public discussion of specific targets, saying only that assessments were continuing. Iranian statements focused instead on describing the operation as a response to earlier actions, without confirming details about objectives. The lack of precise information made it difficult for outside observers to determine whether the attack was limited or part of a larger plan. Security experts warned that misunderstandings in this stage of a crisis can increase the chance of further escalation. When both sides try to send signals without revealing full intentions, the risk of miscalculation becomes higher. Governments in the region therefore began preparing for the possibility that the confrontation could spread beyond a single exchange. Military forces were placed on higher alert while intelligence agencies worked to verify reports coming from multiple sources. By this point, the situation was no longer seen as an isolated incident but as part of a broader pattern of rising tension. As the confrontation drew international attention, concern quickly shifted toward the Strait of Hormuz, one of the most critical shipping routes in the world. A large share of globally traded oil passes through this narrow waterway, making its security a constant priority for both regional and global powers. Any sign of instability near the strait can affect energy markets because even short disruptions may influence supply and transportation costs. Following the latest exchange between Israel and Iran, officials in Washington began discussing the possibility of increased naval coordination. American defense sources indicated that protecting commercial shipping would remain a priority if tensions continued to rise in the Gulf region. In past crises, the United States has worked with allied nations to maintain a visible military presence aimed at deterring attacks on tankers. The idea of a multinational maritime effort was raised again, although no immediate deployment announcements were confirmed. Analysts noted that such coalitions are often defensive in nature, intended to reassure markets rather than prepare for offensive action. Several European governments responded cautiously, emphasizing the importance of stability while avoiding commitments to new military operations. France confirmed that naval assets already operating in the region would continue monitoring commercial routes but described their role as protective. French officials stated that their forces were there to support navigation safety and would not take part in combat operations unless required. The United Kingdom also expressed concern about the situation but signaled reluctance to become deeply involved without broad international support. British statements referenced previous conflicts in the Middle East, noting the need for clear objectives before any expansion of military activity. Other major powers adopted an even more reserved position, focusing on diplomacy rather than security deployments. China called for restraint from all sides and stressed the importance of keeping trade routes open, particularly those connected to energy supplies. Beijing has long depended on Gulf oil imports, making stability in the region a key economic interest. However, Chinese officials indicated that they preferred political dialogue over participation in a military coalition. Japan also reacted carefully, acknowledging concern about the situation while avoiding any commitment to direct involvement. Tokyo relies heavily on energy shipments from the Middle East, but constitutional limits affect how its forces can operate overseas. As a result, Japanese officials suggested that any contribution would likely focus on monitoring or logistical support rather than combat roles. These different responses highlighted the lack of a unified international approach to the growing tension. While many governments shared the same concerns, their willingness to act varied depending on political and military considerations. Analysts said this kind of division can make crises harder to manage because coordinated responses become more difficult. At the same time, energy companies and shipping firms began reviewing security procedures for operations near the Gulf. Insurance costs for vessels moving through high-risk areas often rise quickly during periods of conflict. Even without direct attacks on shipping, uncertainty alone can affect how companies plan routes and schedules. Regional governments increased patrols around ports, pipelines, and offshore platforms as a precaution. Military officials described these steps as routine during periods of tension, but acknowledged that alert levels were higher than usual. With diplomatic talks continuing and security forces on standby, the situation remained tense but still uncertain. Many observers warned that the next development, rather than the last one, could determine how serious the crisis would become. As the situation continued to develop, officials in several countries began warning that the confrontation could extend beyond military targets. Iranian representatives issued statements suggesting that foreign companies operating in sensitive areas should remain aware of the changing security conditions. Energy firms, shipping companies, and contractors working in the Gulf region were advised to review safety procedures as a precaution. Such warnings are not unusual during periods of tension, but they often signal concern that infrastructure could become vulnerable if conflict grows. In modern crises, economic targets sometimes become part of the pressure strategy, even when direct attacks are not intended. Disrupting commercial activity can influence political decisions by increasing the cost of continuing a confrontation. Some Iranian commentators also mentioned the role of foreign support for Israel, suggesting that outside involvement could complicate the situation. Although no specific threats were confirmed, the statements reflected a broader message that the conflict might not remain limited. At the same time, diplomatic sources reported that discussions were taking place behind closed doors to prevent further escalation. Governments in Europe, Asia, and the Middle East all had strong reasons to avoid a wider conflict that could affect trade and energy supply. Attention also turned briefly to Eastern Europe after remarks linking the Middle East situation to the ongoing war in Ukraine. Iranian officials cautioned against the transfer of military technology that could indirectly influence the balance in the region. Analysts said such comments were likely intended as political signals rather than indications of immediate action. Nevertheless, the reference showed how quickly separate conflicts can become connected in the language of international politics. Developments in East Asia added to the atmosphere of uncertainty as North Korea conducted missile tests during the same period. Pyongyang described the launches as part of routine exercises but also criticized joint military drills involving the United States and its allies. Although the events were not directly related, their timing contributed to a sense that multiple regions were experiencing tension at once. Security experts often warn that simultaneous crises can make decision-making more difficult for governments trying to avoid escalation.